Hello, welcome to another edition of Dr. Bickmore's Why Wednesday in Conversation. And today I'm in conversation with a friend of mine that I met in a storm up in Reno years ago. We were up there for a conference on reading and young adult literature and children's literature, and it kind of all spiraled out of control when no one could go anywhere. But we had wonderful conversations, and I met Suzanne Morgan Williams for the first time, and it's been a great friendship, and I've enjoyed learning and getting to know more about Suzanne as a writer and as an educator. So Suzanne, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And I need to mention that we're having another storm today. So nothing like Reno in the winter.
Yeah, it wouldn't be Reno if it weren't unpredictable. One of the books that I came to know you by, that you introduced me to when we first met, was Bull Rider. And we're not going to talk about that today, but people, put that on your list. If you've got kids who there she's got a copy right there, that, you know, kind of cowboy up, or you live in a rural area or something. That I think Bull Rider is a gem that shouldn't be overlooked when you're recommending books to kids. So that's kind of my first introduction, and I read it and just like fell in love with this book. And I thought, well, why don't I know this book? You know, and again, we could talk forever about books we don't know that we should know, right? And we could make lists for our friends and for adolescents everywhere for things to do. Well, Susie, what's up now? That's our biggest thing, is we want to talk about what you're doing today.
So after Bull Rider, I started another book, and it's called Sierra Blue. And I started that book many years ago. It was not a follow-up to Bull Rider, but it's in the same vein. I always think of Bull Rider. I'm going to hold it up again because it's still available. I always think of Bull Rider as a story about how a 14-year-old boy steps into being a good young man. He really is. It's about friendship, family, trust, loyalty. And I think because of that, I have a lot of young men in urban areas who loved Bull Rider. It's not just for the rural kids. It's hard to get them to pick it up. They think I don't do rodeo, but when they do, there's a lot of boys who identify with it. Now, Sierra Blue, you might think of as more of a girl's book, but I'm finding that I have men who enjoy that one too. And you could, if I'm going to show you the cover again, hopefully that it's probably backwards, but there it is.
Coming out great, yeah.
It's about a young woman. She's 14, and all of her life she's had a secret because she sees auras around animals. And when she would talk about it as a young girl, people teased her, so she got very quiet. And now she's starting to have premonitions and see some auras around people, which make her really uncomfortable. And her best friend tells the world in order to be more popular. And Magic, her name is Magic, that's explained. Magic is horrified, and she takes advantage of an aunt who she does not know has a fall and needs a caretaker or a helper. And Magic volunteers, and the rest of the story opens up from there. She thinks she's escaping the bullying and teasing, and she's doing pretty well with that until she sees a horse trailer accident. Can I read something? I've got a half a page.
Oh, I would love for you to read something, because that's one of the ways to get into the voice of a novel, is for the author to do it. Yeah, great. I would love for that to happen.
Okay, and this is a little bit into the book, in the first part of the book, you begin to understand Magic's background. But what happens is she's staying with her aunt. There's a storm, a big storm with lightning, and she is drawn to the highway, which would be Highway 395 here in Nevada. She takes her great aunt's bicycle. She's home alone, and she's riding through this storm to the highway. And she thinks she's doing it to get cell reception, but she just can't stop herself. So she's been going down the hill. She's gone through a lot of things that you would see on a dirt road. And here's what happens. Crack, the lightning shattered the sky into a zillion shards of light that stretched out from the strike like a broken mirror. Energy buzzed through my body. No, I wasn't hit, but I felt it, always. I focused on the ground and raced on. Were there voices too? No, no other weird stuff, just the lightning. The rain started for real, hitting the road in big drops that splattered in the dust like pancakes dropped on a grill. One by one, they ran together into little streams and gathered into puddles. I puffed up a hill, and there it was, finally, the highway. I stopped and turned my back against the rain to call Celine. That's her friend that betrayed her. We don't like Celine. Speed dial 3, right after Rick and Maeve. I tucked the phone under my sweatshirt to keep it dry and pulled the neck up over my head so I could see the screen. No signal. Pop, the ground shook. That one struck. Geez, I shouldn't be here. I was turning to leave when I heard a truck droning up the highway. It downshifted. I watched. It was a big white pickup with double tires and a trailer. The driver was taking the steep hill in a lower gear. I didn't remember the road from when Dad and I arrived in the dark, but now I saw its broad curves and how the land dropped away on the far side of the highway. I squinted to focus better through the rain. Then hail dumped out of the clouds like candy from a piñata, but it wasn't candy. It was ice. The truck took a turn and slid. Slow motion. That's what it looked like. The trailer fishtailed back and forth, once and again. No! The trailer swung wide toward the edge of the road. The tires squealed. The driver must have hit the brakes and held on, because I smelled the rubber burning. For a moment, the trailer balanced over the edge. Then it dropped, dragging the pickup with it, and I heard a long, terrified whinny. And that is when Magic Kendall's life changes, because she, through her gifts, knows she can save this injured horse. And she has to decide how to do it. And this book is about her accepting herself, navigating difficult friendships, and being the woman she should become.
Well, I love you reading that and reminding me of that moment, because that's one of the turning points in the book where she does that. And I love the fact that she and this isn't giving anything away, I don't think, but it's like she knows this horse before she knows this horse. As soon as she sees it, she knows it. And she Sierra Blue is the name that Magic gives the horse. It's not the name that everybody else knows the horse by, but it's almost like Magic says, no, this is horse's true name is Sierra.
That's right.
And that's really an interesting play between some of the characters as the book goes on. And so we'll leave that for people to figure out the play between the horse's name and how that comes to play. But that's a really good reminder for people like me who read the book. It's a really good moment where Sierra thinks she's going to do one thing, right? But she's drawn because in some ways she's needed there, right? She needs to be there, right?
Well, that was a fun scene to write, and it was one that moved around in the book from time to time, depending on who was editing it and what I was thinking. But yeah, Magic, she knows she's powerful, but she's really afraid of it. And you know what? There's so many of us, but no matter what our ages, who have that in us. We know what we can do, but actually doing it is a whole other problem.
Well, that's probably a good segue into you telling us a little bit about some of the inspiration from this book, because it doesn't come from nothing, right? A
Oh,
lot of things in this book come from people you know and have connections with.
that's actually so true. The book started because I was having a conversation with the let me show you again with the editor of Bull Rider, and we were actually at ALA and having this lovely conversation. And she said, "What do you want to do next?" And I said, I would really like to write a book about my cousin. I had just seen her. And my cousin has been a thoroughbred racehorse trainer since she was 19. I mean, she wasn't a trainer when she started, she had a mentorship, but she has worked with racehorses her entire life. She's older than I am, we'll leave it at that. And she now lives in Kentucky and she breeds and races racehorses. And she was the first woman in California to do many of these things. And I'm proud of her. It hasn't been an easy life. And I was talking about my cousin Kathy, who is the book is dedicated to. And my editor said, I want that book. And I want it about a girl. And it needs to be modern. She said she needs to text. That tells you how old this book is. And let's do it. So I started, and shortly after that, we had some shakeups, and it turned out that my editor was no longer with her company. So Sierra Blue was orphaned, and it's been through many iterations and um, many. This is one you can edit out. It's been through many revisions since then, and now it's the book that I want today. The other inspiration for Sierra Blue is my neighbor Mary, who is psychic. And you can believe that or not. My husband does not. I do. We've talked. She's one of my best friends, and we've talked at length about what it was for her to grow up as a young woman who had these gifts, and she was living her life according to that. But what it meant was that she couldn't talk about it. And if there's a huge part of your life, the way you experience the world, and you can't talk about it, that changes you. And so I wanted to write a book for Mary also. Now, I don't believe she sees auras. That's something that interested me. And I wanted to write a beautiful book. And I love colors, so auras are perfect. But that's how the book came about. And I just saw another friend of mine this week who is also psychic. And I said, you have to have this book because it's about you too. So that's how Sierra Blue got started.
Well, I like both of the threads of that inspiration, the horse trainer and something that we wouldn't normally see or think of women doing, right? And a groundbreaking person doing that at such and the psychic elements. I think, if truth be known, many of us out there have known someone who's psychic or who has those kind of notions that tend to play out over and over again, or that see auras. I've met a couple of people who clearly see auras at different times, and one of my best friends growing up used to talk about he had migraines even young, and he would say, when I have migraines, I see colors around people all the time.
Oh,
And I
that's
thought,
interesting.
and I don't know that he ever followed up or studied it or where it could be, but he's turned out to be, as an adult, somebody who's in tune to people who are in trouble, right?
Yeah.
And kind of has a gift of taking care of people who are sick or troubled in some ways. So I think that the world is more complex than we can analyze it in a linear fashion. And I think Magic's a perfect case of that, who she knows she's different, um, but she's trying to figure out what that might mean for her.
That's right. And at 14, everything's very intense. Very, very happy, very sad. She also, there's a scene in this book that I don't think will bother your listeners. It's in the book where she's at her new school. It's like a week into school and she gets her period at school.
Yeah.
And she's horrified. And she goes and hides in the bathroom. And that is part of the introduction of this character, Val, who is one of my favorites in
Yeah.
the whole book.
Yeah.
She's what my daughter and I used to call a purple-haired kid. You know, she has the spiky hair and she's really irreverent and she's not very popular, but she turns out to be a steady friend.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing I remember from being, yes, I was 13 and 14 once upon a time. And I remember the horror of having to deal with the changes in my body, and it was a time where that was much more secret than it is now. But I would have been terribly embarrassed by something like that, so I wrote that into the book. It's a little bit, it's not a whole chapter, but we
Oh,
get to the vow.
it's a good scene, and it's a really good introduction to how, for all of her gruffness, so to speak, that Val is just really a good person. And she's trying to figure out, and that's another thing that's really great about this book. If you take a central character, and I'm thinking of way back to E.M. Forster and his critique of the novel called, he had a small book of criticism called Aspects of the Novel, and he talks about the role of minor characters. I think this is a really great book to show the hub of magic, and then to take every minor character as kind of a point on the outside of that wheel, and find out what we learn about magic through their interaction with Val, and what we
Right.
learn about magic with her interaction to her best friend back home, and with her relative that she's working for, and her parents, right? Even her mother and father are different revelations of who she is, right? So this is would be one of those books where you're going to learn a lot about magic through her interaction with minor characters. I think you've done that really well.
Well, I appreciate that. And I will say for those writers out there that one of the things I've learned to do over the years is I get a really long, long piece of paper and I put the central character in the middle, and then I make a character arc for each of the secondary and tertiary characters. And if it doesn't connect somewhere, then I have to work on that.
Yeah, that's well. I think it's this is really a strong book in terms of I would say the two main characters. In some ways, in my opinion, Sierra Blue is also a main character in this book. Although they're not speaking to each other or having conversations like that, but the presence of the horse is really a dominant idea in this book, and how other people react to or anticipate the actions of the horse or have expectations for the horse all play out in how they interact with magic, as well as the horse itself, Sierra Blue. So I think there's a lot of dynamics going on here that make the book very interesting.
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm interested in your experience with horse books in general, because you've got some horses in your books, and the tradition of horse stories. I think some of us of a certain age grew up, reading The Black Stallion and Black Beauty and some of those Man of War and some of the children's books that were out there at a certain time. So, how do you think this book adds to, distracts from, builds on, what the
That's
horse story tradition?
That's a really interesting question. I had thought about it in terms of what I used to read when I was young and would stay up late and read under the covers. I always was reading Black Beauty or books by Marguerite Henry or um, the there was one called Thunderhead, which I think was a follow-up to My Friend Flicka. I loved all those books, and I desperately wanted a horse, which I couldn't have because I lived in the city. But in terms of this book adding to horse stories, I would say that it's more modern than those stories. It's set today in 2024 or 2023, take your pick. But it also has the modern themes of dealing with complicated friendships. I mean, in the horse stories that I recall, it was often, of course, they were for younger people probably, but it was often a story of the survival of the horse. And I'm thinking of Guadenzia, Pride of the Paleo by Marguerite Henry. And it was the story of this young boy getting the horse to the race, which actually this one sort of reflects.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a little bit of that in this. But it was a little bit more of a linear book than this one, really. Even if you don't, if you're not enamored with horses and you're not an animal person, you'll learn a lot about the racing horse world, a whole lot about the desert and the high Sierra and the rural people who live here. But you'll also hopefully be able to connect with the complications of Magic and her friends and how they interact and who's loyal and who's mean and who comes to the aid of each person in the book. And I don't necessarily remember that. This is less horse centered and more magic centered.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment. And but it's certainly one of the books where I read that I was channeling back in my mind, because I was also one of those kids that was a reader. I read tons of stuff, even, if I'd read stuff I wasn't interested in, if it was the only book around, right? and I do that. But this book caused me to kind of reflect back on horse books I'd read, or to think about that. And I think it would, for older readers, it would generate that. But for younger readers, it stands completely independent, I think, as just a book about a kid and their life and their friendships and their interests. So,
I want to add something.
okay.
This is me saying something that I'm proud of. I mentioned Marguerite Henry, and for Bull Rider, again, Bull
Yeah.
Rider, you're going to get used to that. For Bull
Yeah.
Rider, I won a Western Heritage Award from the National Western Heritage and Cowboy Museum in Oklahoma City. And I got to go and accept that award. And Marguerite Henry also won one of those awards. And
Oh,
so, I'm in good company there. There are a lot of other very lovely people who have won Western Heritage Awards, but she was one that I was really excited to know that we had the same statue in our house.
and well, you should be. I think that's fantastic. Well, to shift our focus a little bit, you have a publishing story with this book, and how much of that do you want to share and talk about? And because I think young writers and experienced writers can appreciate that writing and publishing takes some work.
I will try and keep it brief and positive, both of which could be a little challenging. I started Sierra Blue in 2008. And I was working on it when my dear editor was laid off in the changes that occurred in 2009 in our economy. I had an agent. We decided I should finish it. He sent it out. It was very close to being picked up by another very fine editor. And she changed her mind because she didn't agree with my vision of the book, and I didn't agree with hers. And so I put it aside. A few years later, I brought it out, I revised it again. I sent it to another very wonderful editor who was excited about it. And she said, oh, I think I wanted a middle grade book. So I revised it. And then she said, well, we've had changes in my company and this isn't going to fit anymore. And so I put it aside for a while. And I think I revised it again. And then I decided, well, I had other projects going and I just, that was that. That was probably about 2015 or 16. I'd already been through it a few times. Well, then last spring, 2023, I am a Nevada Arts Council artist in residence, and I got an invitation to go to Ely, Nevada, and meet with a lot of arts administrators. And I had a lovely conversation with the program director from the Clark County Library. And she said, we're having a contest for indie published books. And that's self-published books or small published books. And you should enter. And I said, all my publications have been traditional. They've been through big or small publishing companies. And she said, well, what have you got? And I immediately thought of Sierra Blue because it had been a long time and nobody was looking at it anymore. So I revised it again, made it more, and I think it's much better. I think this was a really good revision. I do have a literary agent. I spoke with her. I said, is this going to hurt my prospects with traditional people? And she said, probably not. So I dove in. And this is what we call an indie published book. If you look inside, it's got my name as the publisher. But it's been a long time coming, and I'm very proud of it. So there you go. The kind of medium length version with
it talks to the stick-to-itiveness that I think authors have to have. And I know that there's a lot of books that authors have that never get resurrected, right? You write them and they sit in the drawer. But this is a good story of one that you kept hanging on to and kept looking at other possibilities. And my word, I'm sure there's stories out there where books have been rejected more times than 2 or 3. But I think it's the stick-to-itiveness that's important for an author.
Well, thank you. And the other thing I would say, because I told you that I spent a lot of time telling people not to do this. I was the regional advisor for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators here in Nevada for many years. And I would say, no, you just be patient, it'll happen. But at some point, again, I used to tell them it's not a race, and you get to the point where it's not a race, but there is an end in sight. And things have changed so much. It used to be that a self-published book was probably going to be maybe a little rough around the edges, but with modern technology, print on demand, cover designers, I hired the people who helped me produce this book. And I think it stands up to traditionally published or small publishers' books.
Well, again, it's a beautiful cover. It really strikes the eye. I think it's one that would, if it were in a bookstore, people would stop and look at it. So I think when you're talking about production value, things have changed so much, not only in the last 10 years, I would say in the last 5 years, that there's been a sea change in what can happen and what does happen.
Yeah, the problem now, excuse me, is that as a self-publisher on this novel, even though I have a lot of contacts, including you, Steve Bickmore, I am the marketer.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty good at it. If I meet you, I'll sell you a book. But I can't meet everybody. So one of the things I've been talking to people about, my writing friends, is that somehow I need to learn how to use opportunities like this, like your podcast, to transfer into people actually buying and reading the book.
Yeah.
And the reading is more important to me. I would like you to read it if you borrow it or ask for your library to get it. But the buying means that I can produce my next book.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm sure that's probably one of the tricky things about indie publication is that it may not be one that school libraries and others drift to as well. In fact, I know very little about that, but I'm guessing that they get suggestions from publishers and other things and big lists of books that are available. And the indies won't be on that in the same way. So word of mouth and school visits and visits to libraries are going to be important for that, I would imagine.
I would imagine. And like anything, there are books that we like and books that we don't like, and you really have to just try it out. And I'm hoping people will do that with Sierra Blue.
Oh, I've got a granddaughter I think is a prime candidate for this book right now, So the next time I haul myself up to Salt Lake, this book will go with me. Because she's a reader and she's a sixth grader, and I think this is going to be right up her alley for things that she'll be interested in, right?
Well,
So
one of my favorite things that I've gotten, the book just came out in October, and I got a photo from my niece, and her daughter was lying on the ground reading the book. And all it said in the text was she loves it.
yeah.
And so
There's an
that's,
emotional
as
photo.
particularly as an author of young adult, I write in that category that the sweet spot is like grades 5 through 9, which makes it interesting because it's not really traditional middle grade, and it's not edgy YA.
Yeah,
It's right there in the middle for your 12 and 13-year-olds, but hopefully adults are going to enjoy my books, and that's true of all of them.
yeah.
But I had
Well,
a point to this, I've forgotten it, so there you go.
isn't that one of the secrets of middle grades and young adult literature is that adults are buying it as much as kids are and reading it? I think if we were to look at a lot of book groups, they're reading young adult fiction and sometimes middle grade fiction as fast as they're reading other stuff. They just maybe don't talk about it out loud.
Well, and I've read so much children's literature that I get really bored with adult stuff. It has to be a really special book for me to get through an adult novel, and there are many.
Yeah.
But if I'm always looking at, oh, you didn't need that paragraph. I already knew that. So I had something really profound I was going to say about Sierra Blue and middle school kids, but I lost it. I have no idea. You have to read the book yourself, and then you'll have your own profound ideas.
Yeah, it'll come back to you. Um, well, tell me a little bit about when you do school visits and stuff, how I liked how in the past we've talked a little bit about that different isn't bad. Um, and how do you address that theme with in your school visits? Do you just hit it head on, or what's your approach
Oh,
to?
when I do school visits, and I have, this book is really new, so I've done some writers workshop type visits, but I haven't done one with a big assembly yet, which is
Yeah,
when I would decide exactly how to hit that theme. But I will say that the trick that I've found to school visits is not only to tailor them to each school's needs, but to tie whatever I'm talking about to my listeners and readers and the writers in the room. We always start with their experience. And so if I were going to be presenting about Sierra Blue, I would probably start with times that I felt really different. I was a fat kid. My brothers used to call me Buddha belly. I got through elementary school by telling the people that I couldn't outrun that I would knock them down and sit on them. And that was my introduction to being sort of to the away from the center of the norm. And it was also at a time when there were less heavy kids. I mean, people
yeah,
were spending a lot more time outdoors. So I might start with that, and then I would pull it into, and I also would probably talk about my time in the Arctic and learning how experiences can be totally different in this same world, and to listen and appreciate that the way we see the world, it can be really very different, even though we are the same biological systems and we are living on the same earth.
Yeah.
And then having told those stories, I would move to, how do you feel different? How do you treat your friends? What do you do when you run into someone who is not as capable as you are, either physically or mentally or emotionally? Do you stand with them, or do you make fun of them? What do you do if somebody is being bullied? And then we talk about Sierra Blue. And when I do writing workshops, we always start with, usually we start with, I want you to write about something, and I'll define it, but I'll frame it something that has happened to you. And then I teach the process of writing a scene through that.
Wow. Well, and I think that's, yeah, you're reminding me of, we can, my wife and I, spend our careers teaching in Salt Lake, and then our first academic job was at LSU in Baton Rouge. Well, we spent, the whole time we were there learning that the world is different in a place like Baton Rouge in southern Louisiana, right? The life experiences of people who grow up just across the river, 40 miles away, might have a completely different experience in school. They might have grown up in homes speaking Cajun French and now be expected to be fluent in English, when they go to school. And that's right here in the United States in pretty recent history. So you're right. I think we can have vastly different experiences just by moving a little ways, even in our own country. And we sometimes try to think of ourselves as uniquely one,
Yeah.
and I don't know that we are ever that anymore. Even in the United States, in fact, in some ways, it's becoming clearer that we have a lot of differences in the United States that we're not reconciling with very well or discussing very well. So there we go with that. Um, well, it's one of the things I would like you to tell me just a little bit more about is what do you think will be your ways to market this?
Well, because it's indie published, I am depending on word of mouth, people reading, one person reading it and then either hand it to somebody else or recommend it to somebody else. Books on our bookshelves are pretty, and if we are academic types, or from my perspective, you can see I have a lot of books behind me, but I try to keep the ones that I might use, refer to, read to my grandchildren, and pass the others along. So if you get Sierra Blue, there it is. If you buy Sierra Blue, share it when you're done. Put it in your classroom, give it to a friend, and certainly tell people about it. I love school visits. I would like to have some more. If you live in the state of Nevada, I'm a Nevada Arts Council artist in residence, and that can give you some access to grants to pay my way. I do charge for school visits because, like everyone else, I need money, and this is my job. I don't have a rich father or an independent trust fund. And but I will always work with schools, and particularly schools in underserved areas or whatever. We can talk about it. And I have, with Bull Rider, traveled to, I think, 30 or 32 states. And that's how Bull Rider sold. Is if I went to South Texas and I visited 4 schools along the Rio Grande River, and they sold 400 books, because those particular kids don't often get school visits.
Yeah.
And I think there was some grant money to help pay for that. And it's not, like I said, it's you can't measure the book in book sales. You have to measure it in readers and effect.
Yeah.
But in order to get that, the book has to be out there. So I need help with people reading it, sharing it, put it on social media, invite me to your schools, listen to Steve Bickmore's podcast for all your great books, and just make a very important writing community. It is really all about community.
Yeah, I think it is about community, and we'll do our best to push this book out through some of the social media things that we have, and I think that'll be great. Well, Suzanne, it's been great talking with you today. We've learned a lot about horse books and magic and Sierra Blue and how to make your way through the world, which I think this book is a really good example of someone making their way in the world and defining who they might be and who they might become. And I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I hope we talk again, and I hope we can do some follow-up so that we find out how the book is doing and find out that it's doing just great in the world.
Well, I hope so too, and thank you so much for the opportunity. What a thrill to have a long conversation with you again. And it's just now starting to snow. I'm not snowed in yet. Really, for those of you, Steve started this with talking about our first encounter. We were snowed in Reno. Not literally, but enough that it had shut down that conference, and it was, we made the best of it.